there at all.
Yeah,
okay.
That's right.
We're rolling. We're speeding on both. By the way, for editing Jay later, this is the video with JJ, and this is your intro, and nice clap.
All right, we're ready.
Oh, I'm sorry. Where do you want me to look?
That's going to be the...
Ignore this camera.
Yeah, that's,
okay.
That's the B-roll camera.
Okay.
That's for our nice little depth of immersion. My eyes are all burning now. What the hell?
Okay.
See what you did?
And both of you try to sit up straight, and JJ...
I don't have posture.
It's
I'm big.
JJ, smooth your shirt out. Smile at me.
It's easier for a guy like Paul to say sit up straight. He's not carrying the frame that we are.
I'm carrying a big frame right now. This whole camera setup.
It's your workout.
Oh, man, this is...
Hey, what's up, guys? JayzTwoCents here, and if you can't tell, I have a very awesome guest today, JJ from Asus?
Asus.
You know, it's one of those things everyone says, how do you say Asus, Asus? Well, I say awesome. Guys, don't go anywhere. Today we're talking about X99 and Intel's new Haswell-E refresh. Actually, it's not a refresh. Brand new platform. Don't go away. All right, JJ, first of all, thank you for making the trip down here to talk about Intel's brand new platform, Haswell-E, and of course, X99, the much anticipated platform all of us enthusiasts have been waiting for. I know some about it, but you know a whole lot more than me. So my first question to you is going to be, what are the 3 SKUs that are coming out for Haswell-E, and how do they kind of compare to X99?
Well, for one, you know, like you said, this is actually an entirely new chipset. It's an entirely new CPU architecture. So we're pretty much moving into the Haswell architecture, but we're moving it to a higher core, higher cache, higher PCI Express enabled part. And what we're going to have in terms of the CPUs that are going to be available at the launch are going to be the 5960X, so the Extreme Edition part. We're then going to have
8 core, 16 threads.
That's correct. 8 core, 16 thread, 20 megs of cache on that CPU. It is an absolute beast of a processor.
I tingle when you say that.
Yeah, if, for anybody that's looking to be able to throw a content creation application in there, or you know, very high-end GPU-based configuration platform, this thing is just going to chew these things out. It's just it's truly a beastly processor and beastly platform. When you talk about the secondary CPU, still extremely high end. It's going to be the K part. Actually, all 3 parts this generation are all unlocked, so they're all overclockable, and they're all featuring that Haswell-E based architecture. And that's an important point because just like the Haswell incorporated the Fiver, or essentially that integrated voltage regulation technology built into the CPU, we also now have that for this generation, which is different than the previous Sandy Bridge E or the Ivy Bridge E processors. So that's going to be another aspect in terms of the change. And then you're going to have the entry level, the 5820 K part. So the main difference between the top 2 parts, so the K and the Extreme, to the entry level K part is going to be the number of PCI Express lanes, as well as the cache. So the 2 K parts will feature 15 megabytes of cache, which is still...
That's still massive.
Yeah, I mean, you're still almost looking almost double the cache of what a current high-end 4970K has with 8 megs, right? You're going over 15, and then the Extreme having 20 megs, right? But the other big differential will be in the PCI Express lanes. The PCI Express lanes on the entry-level part will be 28 lanes versus the 2 higher-end SKUs will have 40 lanes.
Let me stop you right there. Kind of explain real quick what those lanes mean in terms of Haswell-E versus kind of the Z series.
Yeah, sure.
So how does it compare to, say, a 4970 or 4790K?
So that's actually, it's a great question to ask, because traditionally when a lot of people kind of factor the platform, they only look at it from the number of cores, right? But actually one of the biggest advantages that the higher end platforms offer is more PCI Express lanes. How that ultimately translates to you is when you look at traditionally a motherboard and you look at all the slots that are on the motherboard, as well as the number of connections, right? So the number of SATA ports, the number of USB ports, even add-on ports such as wireless or secondary LAN, all those have to be hooked into a PCI Express lane. And so they have to be fed ultimately by the lanes that are provided by the CPU. Now in Z9...
This is where like PLX and stuff comes in.
Correct. And when you look at something like a Z97 based motherboard, the CPU can only provide 16 lanes. So that works pretty good for most standard users and even to a degree most enthusiasts, right? But once you start to trend into an area where you get to really high-end boards, you're looking at maybe 3-way, 4-way GPU configurations, content creation configurations where maybe you're running like 2 GPUs and maybe then like a RAID card and then like 2 capture cards. I mean, all kinds of weird permutations. And those all need to utilize
those lanes.
Exactly. You run generally on some form of Z97 series board. You'll eventually run into a point where certain things will have to be conditionally under operation. So what I mean by that is maybe the secondary port turns off if you're using like all the SATA ports, right? You get some type of permutation that, depending on how you're configuring your system, it changes what may be usable and what's not usable. Now there's this kind of gray area where some motherboards, as you noted, will feature some form of what's called a multiplexing chip. It's a PLX.
Right.
It's not true PCI Express lanes. It's pretty much kind of like expanding them out, kind of like in the same way a hub does, but there are some disadvantages to it in the long term in terms of what you have a little bit from latency, as well as also just from that you can't actively still drive all those lanes in unison. And that's really where this platform is going to give you just much more flexibility. You've got so many more lanes, so much more cores, you've got so much more cache.
What I love about this Haswell-E refresh, or I keep calling it refresh. I want to say it's a refresh. It's a whole new platform, but it's, you know, the X series relaunched through X99, is the fact that the entry-level CPU is still a hex core.
Yeah.
I mean, the entry-level series SKUs on both Sandy E and IVE were 4 cores.
Correct.
Where the benefit over the Z series came into it being a quad-channel capable chip. But now,
along with the PCI Express lanes.
Exactly. But now, with it being a hex
you're
core,
always buying into now going to be a platform that's going to offer you more cores and more cache. So I think Intel paid attention to that this generation. A lot of feedback they collected is they wanted to make sure that if you bought into this platform, you felt that you were getting the kind of the most future-proofing, and you really had guaranteed level of improvement over the current platforms that were available in the marketplace. So whether it's, like you said, cores, whether it's cache, whether it's PCI Express lanes, in all those ways, you're going to get improvement. And then, of course, the other really big one that we haven't even talked about is the inclusion of Ddr4. This is the first platform that's going to be offering Ddr4 as compared to all the other current chipsets that are currently out in the marketplace only support Ddr3.
Okay, now before we start talking about Ddr4, I know my audience has probably already asked themselves, we've talked about it, let's talk about overclockability of these chips.
Sure.
Because when Haswell first launched, you know, the overclocking on them, there was a lot of issues with temperature. There was a lot of, you know, because it was a whole new architecture, overclocking was kind of a challenge for many enthusiasts on Haswell Z series. Since it kind of incorporates a lot of that same structure, tell me what it's been like working with Haswell-E and the overclocking.
So overclocking is actually quite solid on the platform. So in terms of what you're going to be looking at in terms of what you can actually realistically achieve, you know, the base parts are looking at about 3 gigahertz in terms of the operating frequency. What you can get in the real world in terms of overclocking with, you know, reasonable air cooling solution, so like a high performance, you know, closed loop water cooling solution like a, you know, like an H100 or something in that class.
Which is what most people are using.
Especially I think for this type of platform, but even if you were dropped down to like a, you know, like an H80 type kind of cooler, you would still be looking at 4 gigahertz plus easily. Easily.
So clearly the thermals are good. You have to be able to use an all-in-one cooler, especially the H80, which is a single 140 millimeter push-pull option. So in the past, I know they had run fairly warm, to where a lot of people on the X series, the enthusiast platform, would also probably want to incorporate custom water cooling or full custom loops. But the fact that you're able to achieve these overclocks you're mentioning on an all-in-one cooling solution, I think is fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's extremely cool that you're going to be able to reach, you know, 4.2 to 4.6 gigahertz on, you know, realistic cooling solutions. Now that doesn't mean that, you know, there aren't certain factors to take into consideration. Just like in Haswell, there is a wide variance in the CPU and the voltage that is required to get to that CPU. So nominally, most users will probably be somewhere within a target range of about probably 43 to maybe about 45 in terms of the frequency.
On all 3 SKUs?
Yes. Well, actually, that would be even on the X part. So that would probably be your worst case scenario because it has the most amount of cores. So it's the most complex in overclocking.
And that number surprised me because I honestly thought with the 3.0 base clock on that, that they were saying, okay, well, due to the infrastructure,
the complexity
and the
of the chip,
maybe it just overclocking wasn't going to be a huge portion of it. I know they advertised, you know, that the Haswell-E was towards enthusiasts and overclockers, and I thought, well, because the base core or clock is so much lower than the other 2 SKUs, maybe it couldn't achieve those you know 4.0 plus numbers. But you're saying they even in the worst case scenario, they were reaching 4 gigs.
Yeah, even in worst case scenario overall, from what we're seeing from the current set of CPUs, which are going to be indicative of retail mass production CPUs, pretty much everybody's going to be targeting somewhere between, at a minimum, 4 to 4.2 gigahertz. The majority of samples, probably closer to maybe 60 to 70%, are going to be in that, like I said, 43 to about 45.
Could you imagine 4.5 gigahertz on 16 threads?
It's insane.
I can't get my mind around that. And
it does. It makes me smile because when you get to use that type of system and you you get just to chew through something at
Right.
that performance, it's pretty monstrous.
Well, and it's awesome for multi-threaded applications like editors,
Yeah.
but also to live streamers.
Yeah.
It's huge because if you like to do gaming and rendering on the same machine like I do when I fire up my Twitch stream, because I don't like to do streaming boxes and stuff. I just keep it simple.
Yep.
Use something like XSplit DX Tori. You know, you're pulling the DirectX. The fact that you basically essentially have the performance of two 8-core or 8-thread processors like a Z97. Granted, it doesn't just slice in half like
Right.
that, but just theoretically that those threads can be diversified to where you're not going to get frame drops in your game nearly as much when you're doing live streaming.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna tell you right now, I couldn't decide what core I wanted to go with, and I was pretty set on the fact that I was going to just go with the 5930K because, well, you know, it'll probably overclock better. But you came in here today, JJ, and you flipped my plans upside down, and you're costing me more money.
Well,
Transition.
so continuing actually on that point, you know, one of the great advantages too, though, if we talk about total frequency, is that the K part versus the X part, because it actually has less cores, will get a little bit more overclocking. So you're going to maybe look at an additional, you know, 100, 200 megahertz. So overall, effectively, look at the best CPUs,
Right.
both on K and on the X part, you're going to probably be somewhere within the range of about 4.6 to 4.8 gigahertz. But overall, as a whole, you know, that's going to be in a much lower subset in terms of achievable CPUs. Probably, you know,
Right.
maybe 10% of CPUs are going to be in the, you know, 4.7 to 4.8 range, and very low are going to be beyond that. The best overall weighted high-performance CPUs are going to be CPUs that can actually run 46 across all 8 cores and across 16 threads.
I'd personally much rather have a slower overclocking CPU though with those 16 threads.
Yeah.
Because you're talking 4 extra threads over the hexacore and 200 megahertz is very difficult to notice unless you're doing synthetic benchmarking and day-to-day use anyway on a 4-core 8-thread
Yeah,
CPU.
once you can get from that 3 gigahertz to, you know, let's say 4.2, 4.4,
Yeah.
right? The difference between that 4.4 to 4.6 is far lower. But, you know, there's a lot of knobs and switches in this platform in general as well. So when we talk about how you can kind of tune the platform for even better performance, it's not just going to come from pure frequency.
Right.
There's going to be the cache ratio.
architecture.
Exactly. There's the DDR4 aspect of it. There's also even going to be the per-core overclocking. You know, a lot of users always just kind of treat the platform from a singular frequency perspective, but a lot of what you have available to you here is how you can tune it. You can tune maybe to have just 4 cores operate at 4.6, 4.7 gigahertz, and then maybe have all 8 cores actually operate at, let's say, 4.3, 4.2.
Right.
Even giving yourself that much better performance, so as you go from it, let's say maybe playing a game to Premiere to Handbrake to whatever different
and better
applications.
thermal control in that aspect
Exactly,
too.
exactly, and it gives you much more flexibility. So all the way around, I think it's an exciting platform for enthusiasts, for overclockers, and there's a great level of performance. And you know, thermals are going to be something that you have to always still keep in mind, depending on what your cooling solution is. The vid ranges play around a little bit with that; they're quite variable. You know, like you said, I think wrapping that up, you know, you're talking about probably vids from about 1.275 to a little bit beyond, maybe you know, 1.35 to 1.375, but even if you can thermally keep it in check, one thing that you do want to keep in mind is going to be the current that's going to be coming through the system. That is a big
Right.
factor as well.
Right. And talking about all this 8-core 16-thread stuff is giving me an eye twitch because it's right there. It's in reach, and I can't have it. Okay, so the other two aspects of this launch, obviously, Ddr4 and X99. So what kind of improvements have we really seen with Ddr4 over Ddr3 in terms of performance?
Well, in terms of performance, the great thing is that from a stock perspective, DDR4 is already going to be providing you better performance at lower voltage. So you're going to get better thermals and lower power consumption.
1.2 volts, you were saying.
Correct. 1.2 volts is the default along with 2133. So when we compare that to pretty much what the equivalent or the standard is on the DDR3 side, DDR3 is looking at generally 1.5 at 1600. So that's
Some DIMMs is 1.65.
yeah, that's correct. So all the way around, that's a great improvement. But really where we get a lot more legroom is going to be in what the frequency can be afforded. Now, some people are looking initially at DDR4 and looking at taking a look at the timings and thinking, wow, the timings seem really high. But you have to keep in mind that the frequency is high and the voltage is very low that it's achieving that at.
Right.
And actually, it scales actually exceedingly well, so that if you go ahead and drive a little bit more voltage to it, or you want to increase frequency, it's got a leg room. We're seeing 2133 modules, 2400 modules reach 2800 frequency. With Corsair, the system right here that we're running, these are 2800 DIMMs,
Right.
and we're already doing.
That's a Vengeance Pro, or
Yeah,
Vengeance
these
Pro?
are the new Vengeance LX
Low profile.
modules.
They're actually really
Yeah.
nice. So the air coolers won't be an interference.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic.
Yeah. Sorry.
All the way around, though, from a frequency perspective, there's just a lot more legroom built into the platform. I mean, at launch, you're going to be seeing kits pretty much from about 2133 to about 3200. And, even as a year and a half go by, that number is only going to continue to scale up significantly beyond that. Right now in DDR3, we're about at the end road. We're hitting kind of a wall where 3000, 30, 31, 3200, it's possible, but it gets very, very, very complex on being able to achieve that consistently.
Are you finding, though, that even while overclocking these CPUs, you can still maintain those high frequencies of RAM?
For sure. It is actually definitely possible. On most of these, actually, CPUs are not going to have an issue running the memory dividers at 2400, 2600, even 2800. But as always, this is an extremely important point that you bring up. As a platform as a whole, everything affects everything. Right? So the higher you drive CPU frequency, the harder it will be also to drive high memory frequency.
Exactly.
Only the best of the CPUs can do everything well. So what that means is some CPUs may do...
That's that silicon lottery we talked about.
Some CPUs may do 46 at 2800 and a high cache ratio of 4.6.
Wow.
Other CPUs might only do, let's say, 4.6, but the memory divider maybe is not as strong and it can only do 2400 and the cache ratio is at 4 gigahertz. So this is always a little bit of permutation, and there's always, like you said, that lottery effect. But the great consistency as far as what we're seeing is that it's still extremely consistently high across all the CPUs. And if you're also not going to be overclocking, although parts by default are overclockable, so I would say
overclock. You should be overclocking.
Well, at least shoot for the 4 gigahertz marker, right? But
sounds easy to achieve, though. Based on what you're saying.
Very easy. Even at that marker, though, there shouldn't generally be any issues running fairly high aggressive DDR4 frequencies.
Right, and XMP profile full compatibility. You're not going to run into
there is a new XMP profile spec, though, but of course we've worked with all the memory partners, and especially with Corsair, to make sure that you got great interoperability and compatibility. So you can drop it in there, you can go ahead and enable the XMP, and you can be rock and rolling.
Yeah, but I'd have to assume too that even the worst performing, by worst performing I mean the lower range of overclocking ability of these chips, is going to outperform the Z97 series just hands down in every way possible. Yeah,
well, I mean, the great thing that you have overall, if we just kind of recap on all these points, is that one, architecturally, right, we've gone ahead and incorporated that latest generation of the core, right? And that's very important because those are instruction sets, right? So that's the IPC performance. Historically, the higher cores, they usually use older generational IPC, right? So you get the cores and you get the cache, but sometimes the newer generation processor features better efficiency and better architecture. But this way around, we pretty much get everything we could really want. We get the cores, we get the cache, the express lanes, the overclocking capability, the tuning to it all, and DDR4. It is truly the absolute best enthusiast platform. Now, it's not an entry-level platform. This is not going to be something where
you've got to pay to play.
Yeah, this is not for the users that are interested in building, an $800 gaming rig, right? This is really for users that are looking to build, really top-of-line, high-performance systems, but also that are probably targeting a long-term value proposition, right?
Oh, yeah.
You build this type of system, and you're thinking, I'm not going to upgrade from year to year, or even in 2 years. You're probably targeting, 3 to 5 year cycles.
I get a lot of people asking me questions. They're still on X58. Is it worth going to X79? I've always told them no. Hold off. And even then, unless you really have a need for all of the added benefit and performance of X99 and Haswell-E, it still may not make sense to upgrade for you depending on what your usage cases are. Yeah. Because if your use cases, you're just doing general browsing and gaming, you may not see much of an improvement in terms of daily driving the PC.
That's a great point, and that actually probably is going to cover into some of the other content pieces that we talk about. But from our perspective, also as a motherboard vendor, we also try to look at the total experience. So sometimes you don't always upgrade purely from performance. You might upgrade for other aspects of functionality and usability, right? So like on X58, maybe you're missing USB 3, maybe you don't have SATA 6G, maybe the fan control functionality is limited and you wish your system was quieter, right? So, I think what a user should always do first and foremost, and I think you've done a great job with the content that you've provided to your viewers, is try to look at what's your realistic usage every day, right? What do you want out of your system? And some of those things are definitely going to be performance oriented. Some of those things may be usability oriented, and then figure out, okay, is that something that I need to transition over to a platform for? And then also in that same vein, which platforms enable those experiences, right? It might not be that I have to jump all the way over to X99 to do it, right?
Exactly.
I could jump over to, you know, Z97, right? You know, it just depends, right? You know, balance those things out. And this is where, you know, I'm sure we'll get some users that say, well, it doesn't make any sense. I have Z97, there's no point. Every user is always going to be in a respective camp to what makes sense to them. And this is just kind of rounding out the entire portfolio, right? Just like you've got 3 monitors, most people would say, there's no reason for a GTX 780 Ti part, right?
Right.
Well, if you're only running a 1080p panel, then there probably isn't, right?
Exactly.
But if you're somebody that has this, then of course it makes sense. You need higher end components to be able to enable the experience you want.
There's a usage scaling that's involved with hardware scaling. I mean,
yeah.
Everyone's situation is different. Well, there you have it, guys. X99 Haswell-E. There's a lot of information. I know this video is a little longer than the norm, but the information, very, very quality information. Hey, Jerry. That's gonna have to go in an outro cut.
It's your name. It's your name just twice.
J, Jerry. Too bad your name's not like John.
Pull it together, Jay. Blueberries.
All right, guys. I know this video has been a little longer than the norm for my channel, but there was a lot of amazing information here, as brought to us by JJ. Thank you very much for hopping on a plane, coming all the way down here, bringing your hardware that I don't get to whatever. So guys, X99, amazing platform. The 8 cores bringing more than I thought was going to be achievable on the table, and I just can't. You guys are going to see some X99 stuff on this channel in the future, guaranteed. So guys, thanks for watching. As always, make sure you go and check out PC DIY as well. They have a channel over there. Plug your channel real quick.
Yeah, you can go to PC DIY YouTube channel as well as our website, pcdiy.asus.com.
Yep, and it's all about PC building and well, do it yourself, which is what I'm a huge advocate of. As always, guys, we will see you in the next one.